pre-registered coordinates, layered kill zones, a drone relay that never slept. This wasn't a defensive battle. This was a trap, and 2 Russian battalion tactical groups walked straight into it. March 2026, Zaporizhzhia Oblast, the Orikhiv salient, a stubborn bulge in the front line that Russian planners had been staring at for months, calculating how to squeeze it flat. On the morning of March 14th, they finally moved. 2 reinforced battalion tactical groups, somewhere between 400 and 600 men, supported by T-72B3 main battle tanks, BMP-3 infantry fighting vehicles, 2 S-19 MSAS self-propelled howitzers, and a forward artillery group equipped with Tornado G multiple rocket launchers. The Russian operational concept was straightforward on paper. Fix the Ukrainian defenders in place at Orikhiv, drain their reserves, and create conditions for a separate westward probe that would stretch Ukrainian command attention across 2 simultaneous crises. What Russian planners didn't account for, and this is the detail that defines everything that follows, was the 46th Air Assault Brigade. For 58 consecutive hours, that brigade held. Not because they were lucky, because they were ready. I'm your host at War Vector, where we analyze the battles that change wars. What happened at Orikhiv in March 2026 is exactly that kind of battle. A Russian fixing operation designed to bleed Ukrainian defenders became, within hours, a catastrophic demonstration of what prepared defense looks like when soldiers know the ground, own the sky, and have pre-registered every single meter of the approach routes. By the time Russian forces disengaged on the morning of March 16th, 14 armored vehicles lay destroyed in the fields east of Orikhiv. A classified Ukrainian after-action assessment, later referenced in open-source military analysis, described how a single forward observer team operating less than 800 meters from Russian lines directed over 200 artillery fire missions across those 58 hours without being detected once. 200 missions from 800 meters without a single compromise. This is that story. The 46th Air Assault Brigade needs no introduction on this channel. Formed as part of Ukraine's post-2014 military transformation, the brigade built its reputation on mobility, combined arms coordination, and what Ukrainian military analysts describe as an unusually flat command structure, the kind that allows junior officers and NCOs to make time-sensitive decisions without waiting for approval from above. That culture of decentralized initiative was about to be tested under the most sustained Russian pressure the Zaporizhzhia axis had seen in months. The Orikhiv salient sits in flat agricultural land that offers almost no natural concealment for attacking forces. Russian commanders knew this. Their operational plan tried to compensate by sequencing the assault across 3 axes simultaneously, hoping the dispersion would overwhelm Ukrainian fire control. The northern axis would press along a tree-lined road corridor, roughly 4 kilometers wide. The central axis would push across open ground toward a village cluster Ukrainian forces had fortified. The southern axis, the one Russian planners considered most likely to succeed, would attempt to exploit a sector where satellite imagery had suggested lighter Ukrainian fortifications. That suggestion was wrong, deliberately wrong. The 46th defensive preparation had begun not on March 14th, but in late January, when Ukrainian military intelligence first flagged the Russian force buildup in staging areas northeast of the salient. Over 6 weeks, engineer teams working at night laid interlocking minefields across all 3 approach corridors. The minefields weren't static barriers. They were channeling systems designed to funnel Russian armor towards specific kill zones where Ukrainian M77, 7,155mm howitzers and French-supplied Caesar self-propelled guns had pre-registered firing coordinates, every junction, every likely defilade position, every route a rational commander would choose to avoid the minefields. All of it was on the fire control maps. All of it had been verified through drone reconnaissance and adjusted for recent ground conditions. The 46th Artillery Coordination Cell had spent weeks refining those coordinates, running through firing solutions, calculating ammunition loads, building a database that could survive the communications disruptions that come with sustained combat. Which weapon was more decisive at Orikhiv? The M777 howitzers delivering precision fires from concealed positions, the Caesar self-propelled guns providing rapid displacement capability, or the FPV drone swarms that began operating in the first hours of the assault? Comment your analysis below. We'll break down each system's contribution as the story unfolds. The drone reconnaissance relay that Ukrainian commanders relied on was a layered architecture. At the highest level, commercial satellite imagery provided the strategic picture: Russian staging areas, logistics convoys, reserve positions. Below that, Ukrainian military-operated fixed-wing reconnaissance drones maintained persistent surveillance over likely approach routes, transmitting real-time video feeds to the brigade's intelligence cell. At the tactical level, quadcopter reconnaissance drones operated by teams embedded with forward infantry platoons provided the close-in picture, identifying individual vehicles, tracking column formations, calling adjustments to artillery fires in near real time. This relay never slept. Operators rotated on 4-hour shifts. When one drone went down to enemy electronic warfare, and Russian EW systems were active throughout the area, another was already airborne within minutes. The 46th had learned through 2 years of grinding combat that information superiority at the platoon and company level wasn't a luxury. It was the foundation on which every other advantage rested. Russian forces entered the operational area with significant electronic warfare support of their own. The Krasuka 4 systems positioned in the Russian rear were active from first hours of March 14th, attempting to blind Ukrainian reconnaissance drones and disrupt communications links. They succeeded in creating degraded conditions across portions of the Ukrainian sensor network, but they couldn't black it out entirely. And the 46th's communications infrastructure, rebuilt and hardened after the lessons of earlier operations, had redundant pathways that Russian jamming was never able to simultaneously suppress. There's something worth pausing on here. The common assumption in Western military commentary is that electronic warfare degrades both sides equally, that jamming creates a fog of war that advantages neither attacker nor defender. Orikhiv challenges that assumption directly. The defender, operating on familiar ground with pre-established command nodes and hardened communication links, is inherently more resilient to EW disruption than the attacker, who is coordinating complex movement in an unfamiliar environment while also managing electronic countermeasures. The 46th understood this asymmetry and had built their defensive architecture to exploit it. By 2:00 a.m. on March 14th, Ukrainian forward observation posts were already tracking Russian forces moving from their staging areas. The advanced reconnaissance teams of both Russian BTGs were probing along expected approach routes, trying to find gaps in Ukrainian defenses. They found none. What they found were precisely the paths Ukrainian engineers had left open. Channels through the minefields that looked like defensive gaps but were actually entry points to the kill zones. Stay with this. What happens in the next 2 hours sets the conditions for everything that follows across 58 hours of combat, and the decision a Russian column commander makes at 3:47 a.m. becomes the single worst tactical choice of the entire engagement. At 3:47 a.m., the lead element of the northern Russian BTG, a company-sized group of 5 T-72B3 tanks and 12 BMP-3 infantry fighting vehicles, crossed the line of departure and entered the Orikhiv approach corridor. The column moved with reasonable tactical spacing, roughly 50 to 75 meters between vehicles, suggesting experienced vehicle commanders. But they were moving faster than Ukrainian observers expected, almost impatient. The explanation emerged later from intercepted communications. The Russian column commander had been pressured by the BTG commander to accelerate. Coordination with the central and southern axes had slipped. Those elements were running approximately 40 minutes behind schedule, and the northern element was ordered to maintain pressure regardless. It was a decision born of command frustration, and it would cost them. The first minefield detonation came at 4:02 a.m. A BMP-3 in the middle of the column struck an anti-tank mine and stopped, its left track destroyed. The column halted. Under normal circumstances, a formation would immediately disperse, vehicles moving off the road axis to avoid becoming a concentrated target. The northern column's lead tanks did begin moving left, directly into the secondary minefield that Ukrainian engineers had placed precisely to catch that reaction. A second vehicle struck a mine at 4:08 a.m., then a third at 4:11 a.m. The column wasn't destroyed by this initial minefield engagement. 3 vehicles immobilized out of 17 isn't catastrophic, but it accomplished something more important. It stopped the advance cold during the period of maximum Russian operational vulnerability, when all 3 axes were trying to coordinate their approaches, and none had yet reached Ukrainian main defensive positions. The northern element was now stationary, bunched, and sitting in the pre-registered fire zone of 2 Ukrainian M777 howitzer positions that had been waiting for exactly this since January. The M777 is a 155mm towed howitzer, light by artillery standards at under 4,000 kilograms, which allows Ukrainian crews to displace rapidly after firing, critical for survival against Russian counter-battery radar. It fires standard NATO 155mm ammunition, including the M795 high-explosive projectile, and, when available, Excalibur GPS-guided rounds with a circular error probable of under 10 meters at ranges up to 40 kilometers. On the morning of March 14th, the 2 M777 positions assigned to the northern kill zone were loaded with M795 projectiles, 6 rounds per gun, preset charges already determined from the pre-registration fires conducted weeks earlier. The fire mission came in at 14 a.m., 12 rounds, 2 guns, pre-registered coordinates. The first salvos walked directly through the stalled column. A T-72B3 turret took 2 near-simultaneous impacts. A BMP-3 already immobilized by the minefield was hit directly. A third vehicle, trying to reverse out of the minefield lane, was caught in the open. The northern column immediately returned fire, BMP-3 30mm autocannons and tank main guns engaging toward the flash signatures of the Ukrainian artillery. But the M777 crews were already executing their displacement drill, moving to secondary positions 1.2 kilometers away. By the time Russian fire reached the primary positions, they were empty. Ukrainian drone operators watching the engagement from above began feeding updated targeting data to the artillery coordination cell. The northern column was trying to recover, vehicles searching for paths around the mines, medics working on crew casualties, the BTG command element on the radio trying to understand the situation. Every one of those movements was being tracked in real time. The second fire mission came at 4:31 a.m., this time from a Caesar position. The Caesar, camion équipé d'un système d'artillerie, is a French-designed, self-propelled 155mm howitzer mounted on a 6-wheel drive truck chassis. Its defining tactical characteristic is its ability to fire a 6-round magazine and move to a new position within 60 seconds of the last shot. Ukrainian crews operating Caesar systems have refined this shoot-and-scoot capability to the point where the vehicles are nearly impossible to fix with counter-battery fire. The system has a range of up to 40 kilometers with standard ammunition and can achieve a rate of fire of 6 rounds per minute during sustained engagements. The Caesar fire mission at 4:31 a.m. targeted recovery vehicles that had moved up from the northern BTG's rear echelon, precisely the predictable Russian response to a stalled column. 4 rounds, 2 hits confirmed by drone observation. The recovery effort stopped. How many armored vehicles did the 46th Air Assault Brigade destroy across all 58 hours of this battle? We'll put the exact count at the end of this video, but here's the question. Was it A9 vehicles, B14 vehicles, or C22 vehicles? Hold that number in your head as the story continues. By 5:00 a.m., the northern Russian axis had lost forward momentum entirely. The central and southern axes were still maneuvering, having received warning from the Northern Element's radio traffic about the minefields. Russian commanders adjusted their approach routes, and in doing so, moved directly into the alternate kill zones that Ukrainian planners had, prepared for exactly that adjustment. The war in Ukraine has produced a pattern that Russian operational planners have struggled to break: the adaptive Ukrainian defense. When Russian forces adjust to one threat, they encounter another. When they find a gap, it's often because Ukrainian forces created it deliberately. The 46th Defensive Network at Orikhiv was a masterclass in this approach. Not static line to be held at all costs, but a dynamic system designed to punish Russian decision-making at every branch point. Put yourself in the position of the southern Russian BTG commander at 5:30 a.m. on March 14th. Your northern counterpart is stalled and taking fire. Your coordination timeline has collapsed. Your division commander is demanding to know why the fixing operation isn't fixing anything. And your own scouts are reporting mine indicators along your primary approach route. What do? The southern BTG commander made what was, under the circumstances, a reasonable choice. He shifted his axis 800 meters to the west, toward a farm track that his reconnaissance drones had identified as apparently clear. It was clear. It had been left clear. It led directly into the killing ground that the 46th's forward observers had been staring at for 6 weeks. The one with the best pre-registered coverage from both M777 positions and a Caesar battery positioned 22 kilometers to the northwest. The southern column crossed into the kill zone at 5:58 a.m. Drone observation had been tracking it for 40 minutes. The forward observer team, the one that would eventually direct over 200 fire missions from 800 meters away, made its first call at 5:59 a.m. Subscribe to War Vector if you want to understand how modern warfare actually works. Because what this forward observer team accomplished over the next 57 hours is the kind of thing that will be in military doctrine manuals for the next decade. The forward observer position was a prepared hide roughly 800 meters from the Russian line of advance, close enough to provide accurate visual observation even in pre-dawn darkness using thermal optics, far enough back to be outside the normal patrol range Russian infantry would establish around a moving column, 2 soldiers, a thermal observation device, a laser rangefinder, 2 separate radio systems operating on different frequency bands, and a backup satellite communication terminal for the periods when Russian EW suppressed the primary radio links. Their first fire mission targeted the lead vehicles of the southern column at a road junction where the farm track crossed a shallow drainage ditch, exactly the kind of terrain feature that slows vehicle movement and creates natural bunching. The junction had been pre-registered. The coordinates were already in the fire control system. The Caesar battery 22 kilometers away needed only a confirmation call. 6 rounds. The first 2 impacted short, adjusted by the observer's correction, and the next 4 walked directly through the bunched vehicles at the junction. A T-72B3 took a hit that destroyed its running gear. 2 BMP-3s were disabled. The column stopped. What followed across the next several hours was a grinding engagement in which the southern BTG tried to recover momentum through dismounted infantry, advances, smoke screening, and renewed armored pushes. Each attempt was tracked by the Ukrainian drone network. Each provided targeting data for additional fire missions. Each was met with pre-positioned fires that the forward observer team refined with adjustments called in from 800 meters away. Russian infantry tried to locate the Ukrainian observer position 3 times in the first 6 hours. All 3 searches failed. The observer team had prepared 3 separate positions within their 800-meter operational area, rotating between them after each adjustment call. Russian thermal search drones swept the area repeatedly, but the team's thermal signature management, using reflective blankets and positioning within existing structures, kept them invisible. Here is the part that doesn't make sense on the surface, and yet it defined the entire 58-hour battle. 2 soldiers, directing fires from a position that most commanders would consider suicidal, became the decisive element in holding an entire salient against 2 reinforced battalion tactical groups. The mathematics of modern warfare are strange. A $500 FPV drone can destroy a $3 million tank. 2 soldiers with radios and a rangefinder can direct enough artillery fire to stop an armored advance. The 46th's commanders understood this, and they had built their defensive system around the multiplication of exactly these kinds of asymmetric capabilities. By 11 a.m. on March 14th, 6 hours into the engagement, the tactical picture had shifted in Ukrainian favor, but was far from resolved. The northern Russian BTG had lost 4 vehicles destroyed and roughly 8 damaged or immobilized. The southern BTG had lost 3 destroyed and 5 damaged. The central axis, which had been slower to advance, was now probing forward more. Cautiously, its commander apparently having absorbed the morning's lessons. Russian artillery support had intensified. The 2 S-19 MSDS batteries and Tornado GMLR systems in the Russian rear had been conducting counter-battery fire throughout the morning, trying to locate and destroy the Ukrainian guns punishing the column advances. Ukrainian counter-battery radar, the ANTPQ-36 and ANTPQ-37 systems supplied by Western partners, was tracking the Russian fires and generate counter-battery solutions. The artillery duel that unfolded across the midday hours of March 14th was, by any measure, a full-scale exchange between sophisticated opposing systems. What strikes me about this phase of the battle is what it reveals about the cumulative effect of 2 years of Western military support. Ukrainian counter-battery capability in early 2024 was competent but resource-constrained. By March 2026, the combination of Western radar systems, GPS-guided 155mm round, and hardened communications had given Ukrainian artillery a survivability and precision that Russian counter-battery fire consistently failed to neutralize. The 46s fired and moved. The Russian guns fired from fixed positions because the logistics infrastructure to support rapid displacement didn't exist at the required scale. Position after position was identified and struck by Ukrainian counter-battery fires. Ukrainian General Staff reports from this period consistently note the degrading effect of these counter-battery strikes on Russian artillery support. Rates. By mid-afternoon on March 14th, the Tornado G battery that had been most active in the morning had lost 2 vehicles to counter-battery fire and reduced its rate of fire significantly. The 2 S-19 battery lost 1 gun to a precision strike at 2:17 p.m., likely an Excalibur round given the accuracy of the impact. Russian artillery support for the assault didn't stop, but it was increasingly disrupted, increasingly cautious, and increasingly less effective. The Central Russian Axis made its first serious push at 1:45 p.m., apparently timed to coincide with what Russian commanders hoped was a window of reduced Ukrainian attention following the intense morning fighting. 8 T-72B3 tanks and 20 BMP-3s advanced along a route that the BTG commander had identified as offering the best ground conditions and the least obvious mine threat. FPV drone operators assigned to the central sector had been watching this axis for 3 hours. 8 drones were prepped and armed. The operators had reviewed drone footage of the Russian vehicles' approach routes and identified 2 choke points where the terrain would force the column into concentrated formation. Places where a single drone hit could block the route and create a target-rich environment for follow-on strikes. The first FPV strike came at 1:52 p.m. An FPV first-person view kamikaze drone is a commercial quadcopter modified for military use, typically carrying a rocket-propelled grenade warhead or a small-shaped charge. They cost roughly $400 to $700 to build and field. They are piloted by operators wearing FPV goggles who see what the drone sees, guiding it manually into the target. Against armored vehicles, they are most effective striking the top armor, the thinnest point, or targeting vision blocks, engine compartments, and crew hatches. Against the T-72B3, which has minimal top armor protection, despite its explosive reactive armor panels on the hull and turret, a well-placed FPV strike can disable the vehicle even without achieving a catastrophic kill. The first strike at 1:52 p.m. disabled a BMP-3 at the first choke point, blocking the route. The column stopped. 4 more drones immediately engaged the stationary formation. One struck the lead T-72B3 on the engine deck, setting it ablaze. Another hit a second BMP-3. The remaining 2 drones missed. Electronic warfare jamming from the Russian column disrupted their control signals in the final meters of approach. 2 hits out of 6 drones. That ratio is consistent with documented Ukrainian FPV strike data in heavily jammed environments. But those 2 hits accomplished the tactical objective. The column was stopped, now exposed in the open, with burning vehicles creating smoke columns that Ukrainian observers used to refine their targeting. Artillery followed. The pre-registered coordinates for the central choke points were already in the system. Within 8 minutes of the first FPV strike, M777 rounds were impacting the stalled formation. The second Russian breakthrough attempt on the central axis came at 6:30 p.m., with infantry leading rather than armor. An attempt to clear Ukrainian positions through dismounted assault before committing vehicles. It was a doctrinal adjustment, and it might have worked against a less prepared defender. But the 46th's forward positions were backed by anti-tank guided missile teams equipped with Javelin systems, and the infantry advance was met with accurate small arms fire from positions that Russian forces had not successfully located. If you believe that tactical preparation and combined arms coordination are what win modern battles, and everything at Orikhiv proves that they are, type war vector in the comments. The Javelin is a fire and forejet anti-tank missile with a range of up to 4 kilometers and a tandem-shaped charge. Warhead designed to defeat explosive reactive armor. Its top attack flight profile guides the missile to strike the thinnest top armor of any tank. Javelin teams in the 46th had been positioned to cover the dismounted infantry axes, the routes Russian infantry would logically use when advancing, without vehicle support. 3 Javelin engagements were recorded during the Central Axis infantry assault at 6:30 p.m. 2 achieved confirmed kills on T-72B3 tanks that had advanced to support the infantry push. The infantry assault stopped. Hour 24 found both Russian BTGs in a condition their planners hadn't contemplated, stalled on all 3 axes, having suffered significant vehicle losses, with artillery support degraded by counter-battery fires, and with their electronic warfare capabilities failing to suppress the Ukrainian drone network they needed to blind. The fixing operation that was supposed to pin Ukrainian forces in place had instead pinned Russian forces in place, in terrain that Ukrainian artillery had pre-registered and that Ukrainian drones were watching continuously. Then, at hour 31, the communications breakdown came. It happened at 9:47 a.m. on March 15th. The primary communications link between the 46th Brigade headquarters and the Eastern Flank Battalion collapsed. Russian EW assets, apparently repositioned during the night to target specifically the frequencies identified through signal intelligence from the previous day's fires, achieved a sustained jamming effect that dropped the primary radio net. For roughly 47 minutes, the Eastern Flank Battalion commander was operating on his own initiative, without real-time coordination from brigade headquarters. Those 47 minutes were the most dangerous of the entire 58-hour battle. The eastern flank was the 46th's thinnest defensive sector, not because it was poorly planned, but because the terrain channeled Russian approaches away from that axis, making it a lower priority allocation in the defensive layout. With communication severed and no ability to call for artillery support through the brigade coordination cell, the battalion commander on the eastern flank was facing a renewed Russian push with organic weapons only, direct fire, mortar support, and whatever FPV drones his battalion's organic drone section could put in the air. 14 Russian vehicles pressed the eastern sector beginning at 10:03 a.m. They had apparently identified the communications degradation. Intercepts of Russian command nets showed traffic suggesting that Russian EW operators had reported a Ukrainian comms blackout, and their BTG commanders had immediately ordered a coordinated push to exploit it. This is the kind of adaptive exploitation of electronic warfare success that Russian forces have shown periodic capability to execute. It requires good signals intelligence, fast command decision-making, and pre-planned response packages that can be activated quickly. The Russian success in identifying and exploiting the 47-minute communications gap demonstrated genuine operational competence, which makes what happened next all the more significant. The Eastern Battalion held. Without brigade artillery support, the battalion commander committed his mortar sections, 482mm and two 120mm mortar systems, to direct support of the forward positions. FPV operators launched 6 drones against the advancing Russian column, achieving 3 effective strikes in relatively low jamming conditions since the Russian EW assets were focused on the communication suppression mission rather than drone countermeasures. Ukrainian infantry in prepared fighting positions used anti-tank rocket systems at ranges under 400 meters against vehicles that had advanced into close contact. It was brutal, grinding, close-in defensive combat of the kind that has defined the Ukraine conflict at the tactical level. Soldiers, in prepared positions, using every available weapon, making independent decisions because the command system couldn't help them. Holding ground through a combination of preparation, discipline, and the localized initiative that the 46th's training and culture had built over 2 years. At 10:34 a.m., the backup satellite communications terminal at brigade headquarters re-established the link to the eastern flank. The first words of the Eastern Battalion commander, recorded in the post-battle reconstruction, were a set of precise grid coordinates for artillery fire missions that had been prepared during the communications blackout, targets that the battalion's drone section had been tracking, and his forward observers had already calculated firing solutions for, ready to call the moment communications were restored. Artillery rounds were in the air within 4 minutes of the link re-establishing. The Russian eastern collapsed at 11:15 a.m., having failed to achieve a meaningful breakthrough despite the communications advantage. 2 Russian vehicles were destroyed in the final phase of the collapse by direct fires and FPV strikes. The remaining 12 withdrew to their staging positions, leaving behind 2 vehicles immobilized during the advance that couldn't be recovered under Ukrainian fire. What would NATO have done differently in the eastern flank crisis? Specifically, would a NATO doctrine of more rigid centralized fire control have survived that 47-minute communications blackout as effectively as the 46th decentralized initiative approach? Comment your analysis, because this is genuinely one of the most important doctrinal questions that Orikhiv raises. The afternoon of March 15th brought the third and final Russian breakthrough attempt, the one that Russian BTG commanders apparently believed had the best chance of success. Having observed that the northern and central axes were thoroughly covered by Ukrainian pre-registered fires, and having established, they believed, that the eastern flank had genuine defensive limitations, the Russian plan for the third push combined renewed eastern pressure with a fresh commitment on the central axis, using reserves held back from the first day's fighting. The reserve commitment included T-80 BVM tanks, a more modern variant than the T-72 B3s that had taken heavy losses on day 1. The T-80 BVM carries Contact 5 explosive reactive armor and can be fitted with active protection systems. It is a capable platform, and its introduction to the Orikhiv engagement represented a genuine escalation of Russian armored commitment. Ukrainian intelligence had been tracking the T-80 BVM elements since their arrival in the Russian staging areas on February 28th. Their commitment to the battle on March 15th was anticipated. The 46th Artillery Coordination Cell had already developed specific firing solutions for the routes those vehicles would most likely use, and had allocated a portion of its Excalibur GPS-guided round allocation specifically for targets where the precision of guided munitions would be most valuable. The T-80 BVM commitment began at 2:30 p.m. 8 tanks, advancing on a 600-meter front with infantry support and smoke screening from self-propelled mortars. The smoke was effective. It degraded Ukrainian thermal observation for roughly 12 minutes, the longest sustained blind spot Ukrainian forward observers experienced across the entire 58-hour battle. Those 12 minutes were tense. The forward observer team on the central sector, suddenly unable to provide accurate adjustment calls, shifted to pre-planned fires on the most likely positions within the smoke screen, rather than adjusted fires based on direct observation. It was a managed degradation, not a catastrophic failure, but it allowed the T-80 BVM column to advance roughly 400 meters further than Ukrainian planners had anticipated before the smoke thinned. Something that tends to get lost in Western analysis of this battle. The smoke screening capability Russian forces demonstrated on March 15th has been consistently underestimated. The tendency in open-source commentary is to focus on Russian failures of adaptation, and those failures are real and documented. But the selective integration of mature Soviet-era tactics, combined smoke, coordinated infantry, reserve commitment timing, shows that individual Russian BTG commanders absorbed at least some lessons from 2 years of combat. The failure at Orikhiv wasn't a failure of tactical awareness. It was a failure of strategic-level planning that sent capable tactical units into a defensive system specifically designed to defeat them. At 2:42 p.m., the smoke began to thin. Ukrainian thermal observation reacquired the T-80 BVM column at 2,300 meters, closer than preferred, but still within effective artillery range and outside the direct fire engagement zones. An Excalibur round, GPS-guided, impacted the lead T-80 BVM at 2:44 p.m. The 155mm guided projectile struck the vehicle's turret roof, the same thin top armor vulnerability that Javelin exploits. The tank was catastrophically destroyed. The 3 T-80 BVMs behind it, seeing the lead vehicle burst apart ahead of them, slowed, and slowing in a pre-registered kill zone is a fatal decision. 4 more artillery rounds, conventional M795, impacted the stalled column in the next 90 seconds. A second T-80 BVM was disabled. The advance stopped. The infantry that had been moving with the tank column now found itself exposed in the open without armored support. Ukrainian infantry from the forward positions engaged with direct fire. FPV drones targeted the infantry concentration. The assault, which had come closer to the Ukrainian main defensive line than any previous Russian effort in this battle, collapsed within 22 minutes of achieving its maximum penetration. By 6 p.m. on March 15th, hour 36 of the battle, Russian forces had conducted their 3 planned breakthrough attempts, and none had achieved meaningful penetration. The fixing operation, designed to pin Ukrainian forces in place while a separate westward probe developed, had consumed both Russian BTGs without creating the conditions it was intended to create. The separate westward probe, deprived of the defensive distraction it was supposed to exploit, had itself stalled against Ukrainian positions that were reinforced because the reserves had not been drawn to Orikhiv. Satellite imagery analysis, confirmed by Ukrainian General Staff reporting, showed Russian logistics vehicles moving ammunition forward to the BTG staging areas throughout the night of March 15th to 16th. Russian forces were preparing for another day of operations. The 46th was preparing for exactly the same. One detail from the after-action reconstruction that has stayed with me. At 3:15 a.m. on March 16th, the brigade commander, his name has not been publicly released, consistent with Ukrainian operational security, made the decision that his subordinate commanders later identified as potentially the most consequential single choice of the entire battle. A forward infantry position on the northern axis had taken casualties from Russian artillery fire during the night and was requesting permission to withdraw 300 meters to a secondary prepared position. The brigade commander denied the request. His reasoning, reconstructed from the post-battles assessment. The forward position, despite its exposure, was the observation point from which the northern kill zone was being managed. A 300-meter withdrawal would move the position behind a terrain feature that blocked observation of the approach route. The withdrawal would save the immediate casualties from further risk, but it would blind Ukrainian fire control precisely in the sector where Russian forces were most likely to attempt another morning push. The position held. No further withdrawal was authorized. The commander instead directed additional medical support forward and reinforced the position with a two-man observation team to supplement the reduced crew. The morning of March 16th brought the fourth Russian push, and it came exactly where the brigade commander had anticipated, the northern axis, where the previous night's artillery harassment had been intended to soften the Ukrainian forward position. The push was smaller than the previous day's efforts, a company-sized group rather than a full BTG assault, feeling forward for gaps rather than committing to a decisive breakthrough. The observation team that had been reinforced overnight was watching from 800 meters when the Russian column began its movement at 4:45 a.m. Fire missions were called. Artillery rounds impacted within the pre-registered zones. The company-sized push stopped and reversed within 19 minutes, the fastest Russian defeat of any assault attempt across the entire 58-hour engagement. At 7:32 a.m. on March 16th, Russian forces disengaged, not a fighting withdrawal, not a retrograde under fire. A disengage, vehicles pulling back from their forward positions, artillery reducing its rate of fire, and within 2 hours, a general reduction of Russian activity across all three axes. Drone observation tracked the Russian columns moving back toward their staging areas. Ukrainian artillery harassed the withdrawal, hitting 2 additional vehicles confirmed by drone footage. The forward observer team, still in their position 800 meters from the by now retreating Russian line, called their final fire mission at 8:19 a.m., their 201st mission in 58 hours. When the battlefield assessment teams documented the wreckage across the 3 approach corridors and the kill zones that had consumed so much Russian effort, the count came back at 14 confirmed destroyed armored vehicles. Additional vehicles were assessed as damaged but recovered by Russian forces. Ukrainian combat engineering teams later reported finding an additional 23 mine strike vehicles that had been abandoned or couldn't be recovered, a figure that suggests the total Russian vehicle losses, combining destroyed and permanently mission killed, significantly exceeded the 14 confirmed destroyed count. Russian personnel casualties across the 58-hour engagement were assessed by Ukrainian military intelligence at 340 to 420 killed and wounded. Those numbers carry the uncertainty inherent in any combat assessment conducted under fire, but they are consistent with the vehicle losses and the intensity of the fighting, documented through drone footage and communications intercepts. Ukrainian losses were not officially released, consistent with Ukrainian operational security policy. The after-action documentation referenced in open-source analysis describes them as, quote, significantly lower than anticipated given the duration and intensity of the engagement. A phrasing that military analysts read as indicating Ukrainian casualties were substantially below what pre-battle planning had considered an acceptable loss threshold. The intercepted Russian communications from across the 58-hour period, portions of which have been referenced in Ukrainian military analysis, paint a picture of progressive degradation in Russian command confidence. In the first hours, the communications were operationally focused. Column commanders reporting mine strikes, requesting artillery support, adjusting routes. By hour 20, the communications showed frustration. BTG commanders pushing subordinates to maintain pressure, references to the failure to achieve the day's objectives. By hour 48, the communications carried something different, a tone that analysts described as disbelief. Russian commanders had been briefed on a fixing operation against a Ukrainian defensive position. What they had encountered was a system that seemed to have anticipated every decision they made, because it had. The after-action assessment that circulated in Ukrainian military analytical circles drew 4 primary lessons from Orikhiv. First, the investment in defensive preparation, 6 weeks of minefield emplacement, coordinate registration, and drone relay construction delivered returns across 58 hours of combat that no comparable investment in additional manpower could have matched. Preparation is not passive. Preparation is the most aggressive act a defender can commit. Second, the decentralized command structure of the 46th, which allowed the Eastern Flank Battalion commander to operate independently and effectively during the 47-minute communications blackout, was not an accident of organizational culture. It was the product of deliberate training and the explicit empowerment of junior leaders to make consequential decisions without permission. That culture, replicated across a force, is itself a form of resilience that no electronic warfare system can suppress. Third, the integration of drone reconnaissance, artillery fires, and forward observer capabilities. What military analysts call a sensor-to-shooter loop operated at Orikhiv with a speed and precision that consistently outpaced Russian decision-making. The 46th was not simply responding to Russian moves. It was responding before Russian moves consolidated, because the drone network provided warning fast enough for fires to be called and delivered, before advancing columns achieved momentum. Fourth, Western-supplied systems, the M77 howitzers, the Caesar self-propelled guns, the Anj TPQ counter-battery raiders, the Excalibur guided rounds, did not win the battle by themselves. They were the instruments through which Ukrainian tactical skill and preparation expressed itself. A Caesar is an exceptional system, a Ukrainian Caesar crew that has integrated that system into a layered defensive architecture, practiced rapid displacement for 18 months, and developed the trust relationships with forward observers to call accurate adjustments in the dark. That is what turned a French artillery piece into a battle-deciding weapon. Ukraine doesn't just use weapons. Ukraine invents new ways to fight with them. Real tactics, real consequences, war vector. Now, the answer to the question we posed earlier. How many armored vehicles did the 46th Air Assault Brigade destroy across the 58 hours of the Orikhiv battle? The answer is B. 14 confirmed destroyed armored vehicles, not 9, which would underrepresent the actual damage inflicted on the Russian columns, not 22, which would exceed the confirmed documented count. 14 vehicles, a mix of T-72B3 main battle tanks, T-80 BVM tanks, and BMP-3 infantry fighting vehicles, confirmed destroyed through a combination of artillery fires, FPV drone strikes, javelin engagements, and direct infantry fires. The significance of that number is not simply the material loss, substantial as it is. It is that those 14 vehicles represent a Russian fixing operation that consumed both BTGs and achieved nothing. 3 questions that Orikhiv leaves open. Was the brigade commander's decision to hold the exposed northern forward position, denying his infantry's request to withdraw those 300 meters, the right call? The outcome vindicated the choice, but it exposed soldiers to continued artillery fire for hours to preserve an observation advantage. Where is the line between operational necessity and commander's responsibility to force protection? Could Russian forces have broken through if they had committed their T-80 BVM reserve on the first day rather than the second? Some analysts argue that the fresher Ukrainian fire control systems and fully stocked ammunition reserves of day one would have defeated even the heavier tanks. Others contend that a first-day T-80 BVM push before the Ukrainian counter-battery campaign had degraded Russian artillery support might have achieved enough shock to compromise the defensive network. What do you think? And what would you have done differently? As the Russian BTG commander on the Central Axis at 5:30 a.m. on March 14th, with your northern counterpart stalled, your coordination schedule collapsed, and a farm track that looks clear sitting on your map? The right answer, with hindsight, is obvious. Without hindsight, in the dark, under pressure from your division commander, comment your call. Have you seen the war vector breakdown of the naval drone campaign that simultaneously altered the Black Sea calculus in this same month? Drop a comment with Black Sea, and we'll put that analysis in front of you. Because the March 2026 operational picture only makes complete sense when you see both axes of Ukrainian innovation running at once. Subscribe to War Vector, because we break down the battles that textbooks will study for decades. The fields east of Orikhiv are quiet now. The mine clearance teams are still working. 14 wrecked vehicles sit where they stopped. Some burned to their road wheels, some intact enough that you could almost believe the crew would climb back in. They won't. The ground is churned where Russian infantry advanced and then retreated. The drainage ditch at the central choke point still carries the marks of vehicle tracks that ended there. Modern warfare punishes tactical mistakes without mercy. The 46th Air Assault Brigade spent 6 weeks building a system designed to be unforgiving. For 58 hours, it performed exactly as designed. Stay vigilant.